This is what missing you looks like to an avoidant, the truth you never see. When we imagine someone missing us, we picture longing. We picture late-night messages that never get sent, sad songs on repeat, a visible ache that mirrors our own. But when the person who misses you is avoidant, missing you doesn't look like that at all. And that's where so much confusion, self-doubt, and pain begins. An avoidant person doesn't experience absence the way most people do. Their nervous system has learned, often very early in life, that closeness equals danger. That depending on someone leads to disappointment, loss of control, or emotional overwhelm. So when you leave or when distance appears, their first instinct is not to chase you, it's to protect themselves. And protection, for them, looks like silence. They don't sit around telling friends how much they miss you. They don't replay conversations out loud. Instead, they stay busy. They distract themselves. They convince themselves they're fine. They lean heavily into independence because independence feels safe. But safety is not the same as peace. Missing you shows up in subtle, almost invisible ways. It shows up when they reach for their phone and stop themselves, when they see something that reminds them of you and immediately shut the thought down, when they feel an unexpected heaviness in quiet moments and don't know where it's coming from. They miss you, but acknowledging that would require vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like losing control. So instead, they minimize. They tell themselves the connection wasn't that deep. They focus on your flaws. They rewrite the story so the distance feels logical rather than painful. Not because you didn't matter, but because admitting how much you mattered would crack open emotions they don't trust themselves to handle. What's important to understand is this: avoidants don't stop feeling. They stop showing and admitting what they feel. They can miss you and still not reach out. They can think about you and still act attached. They can feel the loss and still appear cold. That contradiction isn't manipulation, it's conditioning. And here's the part most people never see. They miss you most when they feel calm, when life slows down, when there's no distraction left. That's when the feelings surface. But instead of moving towards you, they move inward. They retreat further into themselves because that's where they've always survived. This is why waiting for an avoidant to miss you in a visible, reassuring way often leads to heartbreak. Their missing doesn't come with confessions or grand gestures. It comes with restraint, with silence, with internal conflict you'll never be invited into. And this is not a reflection of your worth. If you loved an avoidant and walked away feeling unseen, unchosen, or easily replaced, understand this: their inability to show longing does not mean you were forgettable. It means closeness reached a depth they didn't know how to sustain. Sometimes the people who miss us the quietest felt us the deepest, but loving someone who can't meet you emotionally will always cost you clarity, and love should not require you to guess whether you mattered. When someone is avoidant, the way they experience missing another person is fundamentally different from what most people expect. Many assume that missing someone naturally leads to reaching out, reminiscing, or seeking reassurance. But for an avoidant, missing does not move outward, it moves inward. Their emotional system is designed to contain, suppress, and manage feelings privately rather than express them. This difference often creates deep misunderstandings, especially for partners who equate love with visible effort and emotional pursuit. Avoidant individuals are not emotionless. In fact, they often feel just as deeply as anyone else, sometimes even more intensely. The distinction lies in what they have learned to do with those feelings. Early experiences may have taught them that emotional closeness brings discomfort, pressure, or loss of autonomy. As a result, when feelings like longing arise, their instinct is not to lean into them, but to neutralize them. Missing someone becomes something to be controlled rather than explored. This control often looks like self-sufficiency. An avoidant may fill their schedule, focus obsessively on work, hobbies, or routine, and convince themselves they are better off alone. These behaviors are not proof that the bond was insignificant. They are strategies to avoid emotional exposure. When they miss you, the feeling threatens their sense of independence, and independence is the structure they rely on to feel safe in the world. Because of this, their missing rarely comes with the behaviors people associate with longing. There are no impulsive texts, no emotional confessions, no visible vulnerability. Instead, there is restraint. There is a constant internal dialogue telling them not to need, not to attach, not to depend. They may think about you and immediately redirect their attention. They may feel the ache and quickly intellectualize it, labeling it as temporary, irrational, or unnecessary. This internal suppression can be so effective that even they may believe they are not missing you at all. Avoidants are skilled at minimizing emotions before those emotions become conscious truths. They often reinterpret longing as boredom, stress, or restlessness, anything that allows them to avoid naming the real feeling. This does not mean the connection lacked meaning. It means acknowledging its meaning feels destabilizing. From the outside, this can be incredibly painful to witness. It may appear as though they moved on quickly, replaced you easily, or never felt the loss. But the absence of visible grief is not the absence of attachment. It is the presence of a coping mechanism that prioritizes emotional control over emotional honesty. Understanding this difference is crucial because it reframes the narrative. Missing you did not fail to exist simply because it failed to show itself. For an avoidant, missing you is quiet, contained, and often hidden even from themselves. And while that silence can feel like rejection to the person left behind, it is more accurately a reflection of how the avoidant has learned to survive closeness, not a measure of how deeply they cared. When an avoidant goes quiet, it is easy to assume the silence means disinterest, detachment, or emotional coldness. But for an avoidant, silence is rarely about not caring. It is about safety. Reaching out, expressing longing, or admitting vulnerability activates a deep internal alarm system that warns them of potential emotional danger. Silence becomes a way to regain control when emotions feel unpredictable or overwhelming. For many avoidant individuals, emotional closeness has historically come with consequences. They may have learned that expressing needs led to disappointment, criticism, or a loss of independence. Over time, they develop the belief that relying on others is risky and that self-containment is the safest way to function. So when a relationship ends or distance grows, their instinct is not to seek comfort, but to withdraw. Silence is the shield they use to protect themselves from feelings they do not trust. This silence is not passive. Internally, there is often a great deal happening. They may replay moment, feel sudden waves of longing, or sense a quiet emptiness that appears when distractions fade. But instead of responding to those feelings by connecting, they suppress them. Reaching out would mean admitting that someone else still has emotional influence over them, and that sense of dependence feels deeply uncomfortable. Avoidants often equate vulnerability with weakness. To them, missing someone openly feels like giving up power. Silence allows them to maintain an image of emotional independence, both to others and to themselves. It reinforces the idea that they are in control, even when their internal world suggests otherwise. This is why they may appear calm, unaffected, or even relieved on the surface while privately managing unresolved emotions. Another layer of this silence is fear of expectation. Contacting you might reopen emotional doors they are not prepared to walk through. It could lead to conversations about feelings, needs, or the future, all of which require emotional availability. Rather than risk being pulled into intimacy they cannot sustain, they choose distance. Silence becomes a boundary that keeps emotional demands at bay. This behavior can feel deeply invalidating to the person on the other side. It may trigger self-doubt, confusion, and a sense of being unimportant or easily forgotten. But the silence is not a statement about your value. It is a reflection of the avoidant's internal conflict between wanting connection and fearing it at the same time. They may miss you and still choose not to act on that feeling. Over time, this pattern reinforces itself. The more they rely on silence to cope, the less practiced they become at emotional expression. Avoidance becomes automatic, yet beneath that quiet exterior, the feelings do not disappear. They are simply stored away. Silence helps them survive emotional discomfort, but it also prevents true resolution. Understanding silence as self-protection rather than indifference can shift the emotional narrative. It does not make the experience less painful, but it provides clarity. The absence of communication does not mean the absence of feeling. It means the person missing you has learned to manage longing by disappearing into themselves rather than reaching outward for connection. Avoidant individuals often cope with emotional discomfort by reshaping the story they tell themselves about a relationship. When feelings like longing, sadness, or regret begin to surface, those emotions threaten their sense of control. To regain stability, they minimize. This minimization is not deliberate dishonesty. It is a psychological defense that allows them to keep emotions at a manageable distance. When an avoidant starts missing someone, the intensity of that feeling can be unsettling. Acknowledging how much the connection mattered would mean admitting vulnerability and emotional dependence, both of which feel unsafe. So instead, they reduce the emotional weight of the bond in their own mind. They tell themselves the relationship wasn't that deep, that it had too many problems, or that it was never going to work anyway. These thoughts help soften the impact of loss without requiring them to face the pain directly. One common strategy is focusing on flaws. Avoidants may replay moments where they felt annoyed, misunderstood, or restricted. They magnify incompatibilities and downplay intimacy. This selective memory is not about rewriting history to hurt the other person. It is about creating emotional distance. By emphasizing what didn't work, they give themselves permission to detach from what did. Intellectualization also plays a major role. Rather than feeling the loss emotionally, they analyze it logically. They explain the breakup or distance in rational terms, framing it as the right decision or an inevitable outcome. Logic becomes a substitute for grief. This allows them to avoid sitting with the rawness of missing someone, replacing emotion with explanation. At times, this minimization can be so convincing that even they believe it completely. They may genuinely think they are unaffected, healed, or indifferent. But emotional suppression does not equal emotional resolution. The feelings are not gone. They are simply buried under layers of reasoning and self-justification. They may resurface later in unexpected ways, often when the avoidant feels calm, safe, or unoccupied. Minimization also protects their identity. Avoidants often pride themselves on independence and self-reliance. Admitting how deeply someone impacted them would challenge that self-image. By reducing the importance of the relationship, they preserve the belief that they do not need anyone to feel whole or stable. This belief may provide temporary comfort, but it comes at the cost of emotional honesty. For the person on the other side, this behavior can feel invalidating. It may seem as though the relationship was easily dismissed or never truly valued, but minimization is not a measure of how little you mattered. It is evidence of how threatening closeness felt. The more significant the bond, the stronger the urge to downplay it. Understanding this pattern helps explain why avoidants can miss someone while simultaneously acting detached or dismissive. Their actions are driven by self-protection, not a lack of feeling. Minimization allows them to function without being overwhelmed, but it also prevents them from fully processing loss. In trying to stay emotionally safe, they often distance themselves from the very feelings that reveal how much the connection truly meant. For an avoidant, closeness and distance do not carry the same emotional meanings they do for most people, where RS experience intimacy as comfort, safety, and connection. Avoidants often experience it as pressure. Emotional closeness can feel like an expectation to perform, to give more than they have, or to surrender, a level of independence that keeps them regulated. Because of this, distance becomes the place where their nervous system finally relaxes. When an avoidant begins to miss someone, that feeling does not automatically draw them closer. In fact, it often does the opposite. Missing you reminds them of how deeply connected they were, and that awareness can feel overwhelming. Instead of motivating reconnection, it triggers a need to restore emotional balance by pulling away. Distance allows them to quiet the internal tension created by attachment. This is why avoidants often appear calmer after separation. The absence of emotional demand brings relief, even if it also brings sadness. That relief can be misinterpreted as indifference, but it is more accurately a release from emotional overload. Distance reduces the intensity of feelings they do not know how to manage in real time. It gives them space to breathe without feeling responsible for someone else's emotional world. Closeness requires responsiveness, communication, and emotional presence. For an avoidant, these demands can feel constant and exhausting, especially if they have learned to suppress their own needs. When they are close to someone, they may feel watched, needed, or depended on, even if none of that is being explicitly asked of them. Distance removes those perceived expectations, creating a sense of safety. As a result, when they miss you, they may choose withdrawal rather than approach. They might delay responding, keep interaction surface level, or avoid situations that could deepen emotional exchange. This is not because they do not care, but because closeness reactivates the very feelings they are trying to control. Distance acts as a buffer between them and emotional vulnerability. This dynamic creates a painful paradox for their partner. The more you hope their missing will bring them back, the more distance you may experience instead. Their coping strategy directly contradicts what most people expect from longing. While missing you increases emotional activation, distance is how they reduce it. Over time, this pattern becomes self-reinforcing. The avoidant learns that withdrawal brings immediate relief, while closeness brings discomfort. Even when they recognize the value of connection, their body responds more strongly to the threat of emotional exposure. This is why logic alone cannot change their behavior. Their nervous system is driving the response, not conscious choice. Understanding that distance feels safer than closeness helps explain why avoidants can miss deeply yet remain unavailable. Their withdrawal is not a rejection of you, but a regulation strategy. They are choosing what feels manageable, not what feels emotionally honest. And while distance may protect them from overwhelm, it also keeps them from experiencing the depth of connection they quietly long for, but do not know how to sustain. When you are on the receiving end of an avoidant's emotional distance, it is easy to internalize their behavior and turn it into a story about your own worth. Silence starts to feel personal. Detachment feels like a verdict. The lack of reassurance slowly convinces you that you are not important enough to fight for, miss openly, or hold on to. This interpretation is deeply human, but it is also deeply misleading. An avoidant's response to loss or distance is shaped far more by their internal wiring than by the value of the person they were connected to. Their difficulty with emotional expression, vulnerability, and closeness existed long before you entered their life. You did not create it, and you could not have loved them out of it. Their nervous system learned early on that self-reliance was safer than emotional dependence, and that lesson continues to guide their behavior, even in relationships that matter deeply. Because avoidants struggle to show longing, people often assume longing does not exist. But the absence of visible emotion is not evidence of absence of feeling. It is evidence of suppression. An avoidant may miss you and still appear composed, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. This disconnect can be incredibly painful, but it does not mean you were replaceable or insignificant. It means the bond touched parts of them they did not know how to navigate. When someone cannot meet you emotionally, the instinct is to try harder or to assume you are not enough. But emotional unavailability is not a reflection of your desirability, depth, or capacity to love. It is a limitation on their side. You may have offered connection, presence, and understanding, yet still been met with withdrawal. That outcome says more about their capacity than about your value. Avoidants often struggle to integrate intimacy into their sense of self. Being deeply affected by someone challenges their identity as independent and self-contained. Rather than adjust that identity, they may unconsciously protect it by distancing themselves from the person who evoked strong feelings. This can look like emotional detachment, but it is actually self-preservation. The intensity of the connection is precisely what makes it difficult to sustain. For the person left behind, this dynamic can erode self-trust. You may question your perception of the relationship, replay moments, and wonder if it was ever real. But your experience of closeness, meaning, and connection does not become invalid just because the other person could not remain present. What you felt was real, even if it was not reciprocated in the same way. Separating your worth from their response is an essential step toward healing. You can acknowledge that they struggled without minimizing your own pain. You can recognize that their inability to show up emotionally does not diminish the depth you brought into the relationship. Their distance does not define you. Understanding this truth does not excuse the hurt, but it restores clarity. You are not unlovable or forgettable. You encountered someone whose emotional limits prevented them from meeting you where you stood, and your value exists independently of their capacity to recognize, express, or sustain connection. In closing, understand this: missing you does not always arrive with noise, pursuit, or visible regret, especially when it lives inside someone who has learned to survive by staying emotionally guarded. Their silence, distance, or restraint is not proof that you were insignificant, but evidence of a heart that feels deeply and protects itself fiercely. What truly matters is not whether they showed their longing, but that you honor your own worth and choose connections where love is expressed clearly, safely, and consistently. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for giving yourself the compassion to recognize that your value has never been dependent on someone else's ability to show what they feel.